I'm Chris Vestal, and this is DCSLA Radio. The following is the audio from our happy hour and book talk with federal prosecutor turned author Allison Leotta. For more information about DCSLA and our events, visit our website at units.sla.org/chapter/CDC.
Hi, thanks very much for having me. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me if I walk around too? Because Lois was asking if I'm a walker, and I am a bit of a walker. It's part of it. I think it's an occupational hazard of being a prosecutor. So, all right, it's good to know I'm not tied to the mic. So, well, thanks very much. I'm really happy to be in a room full of librarians. I've always been just a huge reader. Libraries were a huge part of my childhood, and I have a very soft spot for libraries and librarians. So, it's a nice room to be in. So, thanks for having me here. I think what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about my job, a little bit about my book, and then let's just open it up for questions and answers. I think that's more fun to have more of an interaction. So, I work down the street at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in D.C. We prosecute both the local crimes and the federal crimes. Unlike any other DA's office, we do everything. At the U.S. Attorney's Office around the country, they usually do federal crimes, but because D.C. is a local city, is a federal city, we do the crimes that normally would go to a local DA's office, so we handle everything. And what I've specialized in since 2003 are domestic violence and sex crimes. So let me ask, how many of y'all watch like Law and Order, SVU, that sort of thing? All right. So my job is just like that. No, not at all. And actually, I need to say, Department of Justice regulations force me to say that I'm speaking right now in my personal capacity, not as a Department of Justice representative. So I'm here as an author and a person, and that's pretty much it. So what I found with my job was that I was just seeing these crazy things every day, just the most incredible things. I would walk to work, walking to the metro, and just wonder, what am I going to see in the courthouse today? Because anything that could happen would in the courtroom. And the subject matter was just, some of the most tragic stuff you could imagine. The worst things that people could do to each other were the basis of kind of my everyday conversations with colleagues and with victims and witnesses. And I found that I was thinking about that all the time. So, and I would come home all the time and tell my husband, somebody ought to write a book about this. I kept telling him that over and over and over again. And finally he was like, Allie, all right, do it then. You write the book. So I did. I started writing it. And I wrote for about 2 hours every morning before going to work. I'd write from 5 till 7 in the morning. And I think I think you can do anything you want. I think if I'd wanted to become an acrobat, I would be a trapeze artist right now in a circus by just practicing anything 2 hours a day. There's an amazing power of 2 hours a day. And they say if you really want to do something, something you really care about, do it in the morning before the day gets all crazy and busy and, you get exhausted by the day. And so that's what I found. I couldn't write at night. I came home, I was so tired. But if I wrote in the morning, I could do it. So that's what I did. And after 2 years, I had a manuscript that I thought was decent, and I sent it in. I got really lucky off the bat. I got this amazing agent in my first try, kind of out of the gates, and she sold it to Simon & Schuster. And that became Law of Attraction. So it's been doing well. And Simon & Schuster recently asked me to write 2 more sequels to it. They see it as a series. So that's what I'm working on right now is the sequel. So hopefully the heroine, her name is Anna Curtis. She and I will have a couple more adventures together. And I know Eileen has read the book, because we friended each other on Facebook. Has anyone else read? I assume the rest of y'all have not. Okay, so I don't want to spoil anything for you. I won't give away the ending or the whodunit. It is a murder mystery, so it's got a strong romance in it as well, which I didn't expect. I thought I was writing, kind of a legal thriller, but actually the fun parts was the lovey-dovey scenes, and that was fun and has gotten has been some of the more embarrassing moments from the book have come from that, because I had to have it reviewed. I had to have the whole book reviewed by the Department of Justice before I could sell it. So I had to give my boss the book, and my boss's boss the book, and several people I'd never met before at Maine Justice the book, and they all had to read it from cover to cover. I couldn't take out like chapter 7. I would have preferred if they hadn't read chapter 7, but there it was. So it made some interactions in the elevator with a little more awkward than they might have been. but they were mostly looking for, like, was I breaching national security? Was I giving away national secrets that should not be given away? And I didn't, it turned out, and the book got approved, and I was able to sell it. So it was published in October of last year, 4 months ago. So why don't we just open up? If you have questions, then great, and if not, then I'll just keep talking. Yes, Mary.
Just a quick synopsis of the book?
Oh, yes. So the book involves a young female prosecutor named Anna, and she's starting off. The book opens on Valentine's Day in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'd start off with Valentine's Day because it's a really difficult time for domestic violence prosecutors. It is paradoxically one of the worst times of the year for domestic violence. People are fighting. Somebody forgets to bring a card, or somebody's spending too much time with their girlfriend and not with their wife, or things just tend to spiral badly out of control on Valentine's Day. So she comes in, this young prosecutor who's very new at her job, comes in and finds a woman who has been badly beaten up by her boyfriend, and she gets drawn into the case against this woman. In the case against the woman's batterer. And what happens in the book, and this is something that happens a lot in real life, is that at first the victim, her name is LaPria, at first LaPria really wants to bring charges against her abusive boyfriend, and she really wants to go to jail and to be punished for what he did. And what happens is 3 months later, the trial comes around, and now LaPria doesn't want to testify against her boyfriend. He's the father of her children, doesn't want to testify against him anymore. She loves him, and she doesn't want him to go to jail, and she doesn't want her children to not have a father. So this happens in about 80% of domestic violence cases, actually, in real life. When the abusive incident happens, the woman, the victim, usually a woman, is angry and wants the full weight of the government to be brought against her abuser, and then by the time trial rolls around, she's uncooperative and might even recant her testimony. And that's what happens in the book. LaPria says she won't testify. Anna makes her testify, and LaPria spins her. She lies on the stand, said her boyfriend didn't do it, and he gets off. He's acquitted, and a little while later, LaPria turns up dead. So Anna, of course, blames herself and feels terrible. She gets put on the homicide investigation. And on the other side of the case, defending the abusive boyfriend is Anna's own boyfriend, who's a public defender. So there's a series of choices she has to make between her personal life and her work life, and her need to get justice for this young woman, and her desire to be with this man that she's in love with. And so that the book goes from there. So, yeah. And Anna herself comes from kind of an abusive background, and so she's kind of dealing with that as well. Her own dark childhood secrets as the book goes on. So, yes.
When this talk was advertised, it was mentioned that you would talk about how real life is not the same as what's on television.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to maybe get the differences.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The question is what are the differences between how crime is portrayed on TV and how it's portrayed in how it really is in real life. And actually, I'm blogging about this. I have a blog that I'm running on my website. All authors have to have websites these days. So my website's AllisonLeotta.com, and if you click on it, there's a blog. And what I do is episode by episode, I watch Law and Order SVU, and then I talk about what they've gotten right and what they've gotten wrong during that episode, and I give it a grade, a verdict. So that's been a lot of fun, because I was finding that I was doing a lot of, I love these crime dramas on TV, but I'd watch it and I'd be shaking my fist at the TV like, oh, they're getting this wrong, grr. So it's much more constructive to be blogging about it, writing about it. So what are some of the things that get wrong? Well, I find that invariably the victim in these crime dramas is a beautiful young heiress who secretly works as a stripper by night. Something like that. Some variation on that. Which of course just, isn't true. There's just a lot of normal, regular people, and in a city like D.C., very often it's poor and disenfranchised people who are victims of crimes. I find on these shows that everybody is solving crimes by coming in with this magic kind of black light that they shine over a crime scene, and presto, you can tell who did it. It's amazing, and no wonder they can solve the crimes in 55 minutes with that magic black light. And we actually have a term for this that we real-life prosecutors call this the CSI effect, and we're battling this every day with juries, because the juries come in having watched a lot of the same crime shows that I love to watch and expect that we have this magic black light, and why aren't we using it on all of our crime scenes? And so they come in expecting that we're going to have DNA, and we're going to have fingerprints, and we're going to have a forensic analyst who's going to be able to look at the last meal that the person ate and discover that it's some sort of poisonous mushroom that only can be grown in the Patagonia region, and we just don't have that stuff. And what I usually end up doing is, if I call a fingerprint expert, more times than not, the reason why I'm calling a fingerprint expert is to explain to the jury why there are not fingerprints. There actually aren't fingerprints all over the world. There are some good fingerprints some places, but fingerprints are really hard to get. A usable print is kind of hard to get. There's all sorts of factors. If it's so fingerprints all have to do with the oil that's coming out on your fingers, and if it's cold outside, or if you've just recently washed your hands, you're less likely to leave a fingerprint because the oil's not out there. Or it depends on the surface that you're touching. So this little iPod thing that I'm using, this might be a pretty good surface for leaving a fingerprint, but this painting wouldn't, or the wall that's a little bit bumpy might not. And guns are notoriously terrible surfaces to get fingerprints off of. In fact, some gun manufacturers, it is said, purposely make guns and advertise them, market them to not hold fingerprints. So they do a stubbly texture. They use material that would be difficult to leave a fingerprint on. So there's that. And then there's they degrade over time because they're just oil kind of left on a surface. They degrade, or you can wipe it very easily, or rain falls on it or whatever. So usually I get a gun somebody's thrown in the bushes, and where are the fingerprints? And the fingerprints aren't there. So I need an expert to come in and tell the jury all this, why we didn't find a fingerprint on the gun. And meanwhile, the jury thinks I have the magic black light. I can shine on the gun and find out who did it. So that's another thing that we see in these shows. And they do amazing things in these shows that have some basis in reality, but not. It's just not. The real crime-fighting techniques just don't even come close to some of the Jetsons-like technology that they have in these shows. And here's a scene that gets me all the time. That you know this scene. You've seen this scene before. There's a guy sitting in jail, and his lawyer's with him, and the DA storms in and says, "All right, now you're going to tell me what happened." And the guy's like, "No, I'm not going to tell you." "Yeah, you're going to tell me what happened right now." And he's like, "All right, well, here's what happened. I killed the guy. I hated him, and here's how I did it." Okay, all right. First of all, that's not going to happen. You're not going to get the full confession, and you're not going to get the full confession when the guy's lawyer is sitting there. The guy's lawyer is sitting there looking mildly constipated the whole time, just kind of looking at his client. "Oh, you did it. Oops. oopsie, you know. But that just doesn't happen. The real-life defense lawyer just isn't going to let his client talk to the DA. They know. I mean, it's not a secret that most of the defendants are guilty, and most defense attorneys know that most of their defendants are guilty. And you don't want, if you're a defense attorney, if you're a good defense attorney, most of the time it's not in your client's interest to talk to the police. If you think you have a client who didn't do it, maybe you do want them to talk. Even then, sometimes you might not want them to talk because they may have done other bad things, or they may not be a very good talker, and they might, spin a terrible web for themselves. But most of the time, it's much better for the client if the lawyer does the talking for him. So you just wouldn't have that scene where that defense attorney is sitting there and allowing his client to go on and on and on and just incriminate himself over and over because the DA is like so aggressive and she just kind of beats it out of them. So that scene always cracks me up. And now that I'm watching SVU, that scene just happens all the time. Oh, also in these, I could just go on and on about this. Stop me when it starts to get boring. But they always want to talk to the detectives, these bad guys. Like there was just this SVU where there's this terrible bad guy, and he liked to fly in 13-year-old girls and do terrible things to them, and he gets this really rich lawyer to defend him. And the first thing that lawyer should tell him is, do not speak to the police officers without me here. That's kind of basic first-year law stuff. But the first thing that rich, terrible guy does when the SVU detectives come is, he's like, hey, come into my house. Oh, yeah, you want to see the massage parlor that I use to have these 13-year-old girls do all these terrible things to me? Oh, yes, and this is the TV where I tape myself doing it. He shows them all those things where, in real life, there's just a wall of lawyers. Yeah.
How many cases do you have to handle at any one time?
Right. How many cases do I handle at any one time? It depends on what section you're in. So the way that the U.S. Attorney's Office works downtown is we rotate through different sections, and starting with the lowest level crimes and working our way to the highest level crimes. So when I first started out, I was handling misdemeanors, and I think I had around 150 cases at any given time. The caseload can fluctuate between like 100 and close to 200 cases. And those are very low level crimes, and although in a big city like D.C., where you have a lot of crimes and not a ton of resources, a lot of things tend to be considered misdemeanors. So there'd be anything from like two sisters who fought with each other and one slapped the other across the face. That's a misdemeanor domestic violence crime. To somebody a boyfriend who hit his girlfriend in the head with a lamp, assuming that she didn't sustain aggravated injuries as a result of that would probably be classified as a misdemeanor as well. So some of those cases need more resources than others, but those are misdemeanors. And then now where I am doing sex crimes, the most serious cases, the average caseload is about 20 cases. So it's you get to put a lot more time and energy into those cases. It's been a lot.
How long do they take
to process and get a result? Yeah, how long do they take to process? It depends. So sometimes you get a plea really quickly. So you arrest the perpetrator. He goes through a couple court hearings, and you give a plea offer, and the case is disposed of in a matter of months. And sometimes it can take a couple of years to go to trial. It can take 1 to sometimes 3 years. There is a speedy trial right for the defendants, but the trial very rarely goes on the first set date. There are usually continuances, not from my view, not so much from the prosecutor's side, because it's our feet that are held to the fire for the speedy trial rights. But the defense very often wants continuances to find evidence or witnesses, or if you're cynical, you might think they want continuances because in sex offense and domestic violence cases in particular, but cases generally, witnesses' memories start to fade. Witnesses' biases can swing from one way to the other, from hate to love and back again. And the more the witness might be, the more time passes between the bad conduct and the trial, the more likely that witness is likely to swing back to love. So I've heard an old defense saying that a continuance is almost as good as an acquittal. It just doesn't last as long. So from my perspective at least, and of course you're getting a prosecutor's perspective here, I see most continuances come from the defense side. So with the misdemeanor cases, the timeline is shorter. There's almost always a trial within a couple months. The case is taken care of, disposed of one way or another within a couple months. Oh boy, lots of questions. That's good. No, it does my heart good, because you're like, oh, is anyone going to ask anything? So, yeah.
What is truth?
What is truth? That's a question for the ages.
Because how do you feel? They give you a new case. Okay? You have no idea about it. How do you face it? What's your strategy? How are you going to get there?
All right. How do you find the truth?
How do you find it?
Well, from a lawyer's perspective, from my perspective as a prosecutor, there's two kinds of truth. There's the truth of what actually happened, and then there's the truth of what can I prove in court, because the rules of evidence are going to keep out a ton of what actually happened. So I need to know who did a crime occur and who committed it. And then I need to know, all right, now that I know this part, the crime occurred and I know the guy who did it, now I need to figure out, and now can I prove it in court using evidence that's going to be admissible under the rules. So almost always what we have to begin with is a complaining witness. Somebody, the woman, I keep saying woman, I'm sorry, this is sexist language. Usually it's a woman. It's not always, but usually the victims in my cases are women. So I tend to fall back on this kind of sexist language, so forgive me for that. You have a victim who something terrible has happened to, and she tells you the terrible thing that happened. All right, so now you have to find out, did this terrible thing really happen as she said? And sometimes that's all you will have. You will just have this one person who's told you this bad thing happened, and you have to just look them in the face and say, that sounds right, that has the ring of truth, it makes sense, it's internally consistent, her story doesn't conflict with itself internally, and just kind of take your best shot at it. And after a while, you get kind of good at being able to tell when somebody is pulling your leg or not. But what you're hoping that that's not all you have to go on, and you're looking, as a prosecutor, you're looking, is there anything in the world that is going to corroborate what she says? Let's see what there is out there. So there's the world of scientific evidence. There's DNA, and that's great. As a prosecutor, DNA is like my best friend. I love DNA, and it's just I wish every case had it. And when the cases where you have DNA, the defenses start to really narrow down, because once you have like a guy, and I'm sorry. I talk about this stuff all the time, so I get a little bit blasé about it, but I realize I'm talking to a crowd who's not a bunch of sex crime prosecutors. But once you have, like, say, a guy's semen in certain spots in a woman, his defenses are really narrowed down, mostly to consent. At that point, if there's semen, the only thing he can, if she's saying he raped me, the only thing he can say is, well, this is a consensual encounter. So now what we're dealing with is, okay, if this is a consensual encounter and the thing's illegal, we shouldn't be bringing a case. So how do we figure out, is this consensual? Was this a matter of force, or was this a consensual encounter? So now you want to just find out the whole universe of other factors. So were these two people out together beforehand? Is this an acquaintance rape sort of thing? And you want to find out, you want to go to the restaurant where they ate at, perhaps, and how are they acting towards each other, and how many drinks did they each have, and what was their attitudes towards each other at that time. Not that this, necessarily means that it occurred or didn't, but you want to know the whole picture of what their relationship was like up until the point where a crime is claimed to have occurred. You want to know his criminal background. Has he done this before? That sometimes can be admitted in court and sometimes can't, depending on circumstances, but it makes a really big difference to know if this is a serial rapist, then you might be much more likely to believe someone who says he did it again to me. You want to look for physical evidence that you can get, like video cameras. Oh boy, there's some wonderful video cameras out on the sidewalks of D.C., and I love that stuff, because when you can actually see what was happening then, thank goodness. 911 calls, also up there with DNA as great friends, because by the time a crime gets to my office, it's usually just two people kind of telling me what happened in this world, and when it's coming through them, it's like light coming through a prism. It gets distorted a bit by the teller. Everybody has their own way that they're interpreting the world, experiencing it, and then reflecting it back to you. But when you get that 911 call, it's just a slice of real life as it happened. I mean, you're just hearing it. You can't see it, and you're not in anybody's mind. But when you hear somebody just screaming, "Oh my God, he's raping me," or "He's got a gun," or "He just shot me," or "He just stabbed my son," you know that this is, you get this slice of what really, really happened, and it's incredibly powerful. And I also find that that's incredibly powerful when, say, you show up in court and the defendant is sitting there and he looks very nice. He's dressed in a sweater and a button-down shirt, and he's got these trendy plastic glasses on, and he looks like a really nice guy. You might even if he came up to you in a store, you'd start talking to him. Maybe you'd go out on a date with him, whatever. And then you play this 911 call, and he's like, and I don't want to offend anybody, but B, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to light your butt on fire. And, this yelling and screaming craziness is going on. And you get a bit, and the jury gets a bit of a glimpse behind the curtain of this nice-looking man in the sweater. And I find that to be very powerful. We also, there are calls that are made from jail a lot. In our cases, the domestic violence and sex offense cases, very often the perpetrator is somebody that the victim knew beforehand. And very often they're calling from jail saying, "I love you, please get back together with me, I'm going to be there, I've changed, I want to be there for our children." And it's very persuasive, and it's also kind of good evidence to get, because you can see what is he thinking. And if he's like, "I'm sorry that I stabbed you, raped you, whatever, set your house on fire," then you're like, okay, well, there we go, we'll bring that in as Exhibit A. So you're kind of looking at this whole universe to try to figure out what is the truth. And it's, I'm not sure, we're ever able to know 100% what is the truth. What was, so much of what we're trying to figure out is what was going on in his mind, what was going on in her mind, and those things sometimes you're not ever going to know. As a novelist, you can know it, so that's fun. Yeah. But as a prosecutor, you're not going to know that. But you need to know enough about what was going on to be able to say, beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest standard in American law, not half and half, not a significant amount, beyond a reasonable doubt that what you're saying happened. And once you're satisfied with that, then you bring charges. So, sorry, long, rambling answer to a short, simple, good question. Yes.
I live in D.C., and other people who live in D.C. in the room know that we get called for jury duty pretty regularly.
Yes, right.
And I have found that my experiences on trials have been very educational periods in my life. Sometimes I can come home at the end of the day and thought, how do people do this? How do the attorneys deal with this day in, day out, and judges? But I would want to know, what would you want jurors to know, just sort of generally speaking? What are the things that you would have us go into the courthouse knowing and thinking and looking for?
Right.
No, I'm going to go back.
Right. And so the question is, she's been called as a juror many times in D.C., as I think a lot of you all are. How many of you have ever been called for jury duty? If you don't mind, just raising your hands if you've ever been called. Okay, so these are our D.C. residents, because I know you all do get called once every 2 years. It's on the dot, because yes, like clockwork, because we do need those jurors just all the time. What are the things? Well, some of them are what we were talking about, like the CSI effect. One thing is that the drugs in the guy's pants never belong to the guy's brother. Never. You're going to get that drug case, and it's always like, I put on my brother's pants that morning, and I didn't know they were in there. They were just my brother's pants. And if you hear that for the first time, you're like, oh, maybe he just put on his brother's pants. Like, the poor guy, you don't want to convict him. And then, after you've heard that the 100th time, you're like, no, I'm not doing the brother's pants defense. It's your pants. It's your drugs. Another thing is that I think it's very, very hard for victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence to testify against their assailant, against their batterer or their rapist. And so just, give them a break, give them a smile, whatever. It's really hard for them to be up there. And keep in mind that people process things differently. Like I've had victims who get on the stand, and when they're recounting this, is the worst thing that ever happened to them. They cry, they break down, they do what you expect and what they do on TV shows. Sometimes they have no emotion at all. Sometimes they're really pissed. Sometimes they're like pissed at me for like making them go through this. That doesn't mean it didn't happen to them. It just means like they're processing this really hard experience to have the assault happen. And then it's a really hard experience to be made to go through the process. And so, keep in mind that everybody processes things a different way, and just because they seem emotionless or they seem angrier or they seem like I'm just mean and out to get the world, it doesn't mean that, this bad thing didn't happen to them at that particular moment. I don't know. Yeah.
So often on CSI, the victim will be ready to recant their story, and typically on the show, either the prosecutor or the police officer convinces them they need to get on the stand and tell their story.
Right.
So in real life, how often does that victim who wants to recant actually, end up getting up on the stand?
Right. Oh, well, that's a great question. And actually, I talk about this a good amount in Law of Attraction, because it's kind of based around that. And it's something that every domestic violence and sex assault prosecutor faces and has to grapple with on a sometimes daily, sometimes weekly basis. And that is, what do you do when the victim says, I don't want to testify against him. I just don't want to do it. And as a prosecutor and as someone who isn't the victim of this particular guy, that he's a bad guy and he deserves to go to jail, and he's probably going to do it again. And you worry. You go home thinking about, is she going to be killed? If I don't do something about this, is he going to kill her? And you're grappling with that. And on the other hand, there's this person, she's a person, she's a grown-up, and she doesn't want you in her life. She wants to go home with him without having to testify against him. And so you have to make this decision. It's a very hard decision every time. And this comes up how often? All the time. Especially in the cases where the assailant is known to the victim beforehand, because it's not like a purse snatch. It's not like a mugging on the street where you're just like, put that guy in jail, like that's it, I'm done with it. This is someone that you're in love with, or you were before, or maybe you've even exchanged vows to love and honor and cherish and maybe even obey, depending on who your officiant was, each other, or maybe he's the father of your children, and your heart is all tied up in this. It's not just, who did this crime. It's, you love him. So, as a prosecutor, you're torn between not wanting to be all paternalistic and being like, all right, come on, and not wanting to take this person who has actually not had that much control in many aspects of her life and forcing her once again into another situation where she doesn't have control, forcing her to testify. So on the one hand, that, and on the other hand, wanting to protect them. And so each time, it's this balancing of how likely you think this person is to be murdered in the future, and how desperately does she not want to testify against him. I find in a lot of cases that the victim actually, in the end, does want the guy convicted. She just doesn't want to have participated in it. That's the best outcome for her. Unfortunately, that's really hard to come by with the rules of evidence, and rightfully require that a defendant be allowed to confront those who are accusing him of something. So, for the most part, if somebody's beaten up, they have to testify. So it's a constant balancing, and I do that. Everyone, all my colleagues do that, and my fictional protagonist does that in Law of Attraction. So. Eileen.
You
feel that there's a difference, or do you sometimes feel uneasy being a woman out there? I mean, especially with crimes like this. Because I used to work in a jail, and usually I was okay, but sometimes these guys would just look at you and just give you this really uneasy
right.
You know, and it turns out you kind of inadvertently kind of like shy back a little bit just because.
Right.
So, and I mean, I only worked there for 1.5 years, so because I never really got over it, but, you know, do you ever get used to that? I mean, I'm pretty sure they handle, you know, female prosecutors different than male prosecutors.
Right.
The defendants.
Maybe so. The funnest part was I've done this for a couple years, for many years, over which time I've had 2 children. And the best part is when you're like 9 months pregnant and doing this, and you're like, that man there. It's really not fair. They shouldn't let those pregnant prosecutors try cases because they have such an advantage. No, but you know, so many of the prosecutors in my unit actually are women. They call it the pink collar unit because so many of the prosecutors that go there tend to be women. I think women are more attracted to this kind of work. I think we have more, and here's another controversial kind of sexist statement, but I think we might be a little bit more nurturing and wanting and maybe feel a little bit more empathy for somebody who's had this crime happen. But in court, no. I mean, I think anyone could do it. Man, woman, the most important thing is you need to have your facts straight. You need to have done what we talked about before and gather everything up, and you need to present it in a logical and understandable way and get it out there. So other than when I was pregnant, I didn't find that my gender made that much of a difference, and I never really worried about any of the defendants that I prosecuted coming after me. I think that sort of thing happens in fiction a lot, and it makes it more interesting because you can get your protagonist in danger, and when your protagonist is in danger, that's good. It makes for a good story. But in real life, the person who's in danger is going to be the victim. That's who he's going to go after. Probably not me. That said, I still have, I'm enlisted. I have a security system, I'm a belt and suspenders kind of person. But I never really worried about it too much. Yeah, it's a good question, though. Yeah.
I live in D.C., south of DuPont Circle.
Uh-huh.
I was thinking if I gave you directions to my apartment building, excuse me, if I was giving you directions, I tell you I live across the street from where Chandra Levy used to live.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You can walk to 13th and Corcoran.
Mm-hmm.
It's the case of 13th and Corcoran I'd like to ask you about. Why was there not a conviction in the Wong murder case? What did that... I'd just like to know a bit more about that case. And it seems to me that murderer lived in the house. And I know what I read in the Washington Post, but what do I not know, and why couldn't you get a conviction?
I would love to talk about that, and I can't. I can't. It is fascinating. I mean, I can tell you I went to a lot of that trial. I sat in on it because it was fascinating. There was some amazing lawyering going on both sides. But that's the sort of thing that has just been... in the news, and representatives from my office should talk about. I just can't.
Is that case still open with the guys in Florida, or is it totally closed now?
All I know is what's been in the press. Okay. So yeah, that's all I can talk about for that case. Interesting case. I followed it too, but as a spectator. Really, I was not involved in it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'll ask you a slightly more abstract question. I love a great murder mystery. But I'm also interested in the use of serious violent crime as entertainment. Mm-hmm. You, unlike most of us, have seen that from both sides, I guess. So I just wondered if you could give us some insights into why we seem to need to use murder and other serious violent crimes for entertainment. Right.
Why do we need to use that for entertainment? Well, one thing I learned writing the book, and I learned in subsequently, like taking some writing classes and participating in that sort of thing, is that the essence of the book is conflict, conflict between the characters. And everything obviously boils down to, you've heard this before, it's either man against man, or man against himself, or man against nature, conflict in one form or another. So, and what is the height, what is the pinnacle of human conflict? murder, when somebody takes another person's life. It's just inherently a dramatic thing. And I think we, just as people, as humans, we inherently cry out for justice to happen. It's I think an instinct, and so you can kind of almost automatically get some emotions involved by having a murder happen, I think, and that's why we deal with it. And I think also it scares us, and I think we kind of like to talk about and think about and ponder what scares us, and there's something about that macabre that is just so interesting and thrilling and magnetic, and I think that's why it is the subject of so many books and TV stories and movies and that sort of thing. But if you come up with a really good answer, you might be able to make millions off of it. Yeah, sir.
I'm curious about the grand jury. A few years ago, I was on a violent crime grand jury.
In Superior Court?
Yeah, and there were a couple of people on the grand jury who could not get it through their heads that it wasn't the grand jury that was supposed to decide ultimate guilt.
Right. Right.
And in one case, I think there was a serious miscarriage because so many people decided to take the day off. And, we had it was decided by these two people that one guy got off. But as a prosecutor, do you have any particular thoughts on how to deal with grand juries? It's more asking for a comment than asking a question.
Yeah, so we deal with the grand juries all the time, and what the role of the grand jury in the system is, they're supposed to decide whether there's probable cause to believe a crime has been committed. In felony cases, they can do misdemeanors as well, but usually we use them for felony cases. And if they decide that, they issue what's called an indictment or a true bill, and then the case gets to proceed on to trial. The prosecutors get to bring it to trial. And in the grand jury, there's no judge, and there's no defense attorney, and there's nobody except the grand jurors and the prosecutor and the witness and a court reporter taking it all down. And it takes place in secret, unlike any other part of the process, which in America is a very, very open process. We give over all, pretty much all the evidence that we have, and all this, and we're obligated to turn over anything that is most remotely exculpatory. But in the grand jury process, it's all secret at that point. So it's this kind of interesting, intriguing thing that most people don't get to see unless you've been on it or unless you're a prosecutor or a witness. So the atmosphere in the grand jury is much more, as you've seen, relaxed and casual than in court, because you just don't have the same dynamic of the rules of evidence and that sort of thing. And in the grand jury, you might have cell phones going off, and nobody really worries about it. So it's
when you go to a grand jury, do you get the true bill most of the time?
Most of the time you do. And if you don't, it's disappointing, but in some ways it can be a relief as well, because if you can't convince if you can't convince a majority of this group to find probable cause, you're not going to be able to convince unanimously a group to find beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's actually two, I think, functions of the grand jury that are very important to us. One is just this truth-finding function, which is what happened, and you just want to get people in. And a lot of times in a lot of neighborhoods, people will not talk to you. You go around, you knock on doors, and people are like, "Get out of my face, get out of my life. I don't." Tell them I'm busy right now. And so one of the biggest tools in my toolbox is my subpoena power is that I can say, "I'm so sorry you won't talk to me right now, but here's a subpoena, and please come in and talk to me in the grand jury next week." And then they have to come in, and even though they don't want to and they don't like me and they would rather stay at home, they have to. And this is a very, very important part, I think, of that truth-finding process, is the ability to bring people in who might have information, and now they're supposed to tell you the truth under oath about what happened. The other part is just preserving testimony. It's just strategically important as a domestic violence prosecutor to get your victim in the grand jury early on, before she falls back in love with her abuser, and when she's still willing to tell the truth about what happened.
What do you do when they've testified under oath in the grand jury and then they've changed by the time
Mm-hmm.
Can you point out?
Yes, right.
How do you handle that?
Well, that's a great question. There's all sorts of rules about that. Yes, you can use her testimony in the grand jury, but there are, in certain situations, you can use it just as impeaching. So she says, like, right now, the sky is red. And you say, but back on March 1st, didn't you say the sky is blue? And so you can, at that point, you use it to impeach her, just to show that she's lying when she says the sky is red, not that the sky is blue. But then in some circumstances you can use it to actually prove that the sky was blue. That she's so it just depends on at what point you're using it and whether she's available or not available. And there's all sorts of different rules, but you can use it in these two different ways. There isn't.
Do you have experiences where appealing to her former testimony convinced the jury in spite of her current testimony?
Yes.
And it resulted in a conviction?
Yes, that can happen sometimes, but it's very hard. It's very hard to get a conviction when the victim doesn't want it. And actually, sometimes what you find is that the victim will still testify, or sometimes she just has to testify because, again, there's that subpoena which makes her come and testify, but she'll not testify truthfully, and or she'll minimize. You get a lot of minimizing. So a throw to the ground becomes a bear hug, and that sort of thing. And then it's very helpful to use the things like her prior testimony, the 911 call she made that day, the injuries the officer saw and took pictures of that afternoon, those sorts of things, to then say, well, jurors, take this all together, and even though she's telling you today that there was a bear hug, you can actually see that it's bad.
Can you make that argument persuasively to a jury that more than the victim has been violated, that the law, the community, it's the state?
Yes.
And that in spite of the fact that she's saying this now, she said this before, and it's not just her who is injured here, it's the community, and we still need a conviction.
I like that argument, but you can't actually make that. I wouldn't be allowed to say the community has been harmed here. The question, that narrow question that the prosecutor needs to focus on is, did he hit her that day or not? And appeals to, like, let's make our streets safer. You can't do. It has to be just this narrow question of, did he hit her on that particular day? And you can certainly say, yes, he did, and you can tell. But I wouldn't be able to say this. Our community has also been assaulted, because I'd get stricken. That would get stricken, and who knows? They might appeal that, and we'd open a can of worms. So I'd try not to.
Do you sometimes say things that will be stricken?
Oh my goodness, no. Now I don't. I try not to. I'm a very straight arrow that way. But I'm also like human, and I say things that get stricken all the time. So I mean, you're in the middle of this. This is probably overly dramatic, but it's kind of like it's close to a battle. You're in the heat of the moment, and the things are flying at you, and you're just trying the best you can to duck and throw a couple punches on your own, and sometimes you say things, and even as they're coming out, you're like, oops, take that back. So obviously none of us are perfect. So I certainly try my hardest to just stick to the rules and just get convictions that way. Yeah. This woman in back is
I personally can't watch SVU at home. It's too intense and too scary.
Right.
So I'm wondering why you even went into this in the first place, and also, do you use something like that to relax? And if not, how do you get it out of your head?
Right. I like I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question? Well, why are you doing it in the first place? My dad was a prosecutor, and I grew up kind of listening to his stories, and he was very proud and very, public service minded, and really thought you should use your skills to help your community, and I think that just kind of rubbed off on me a little bit. And I also, I went to law school, I came out and I looked around, and people who worked in law firms were not that happy, and people who worked in prosecutor's offices were really, really happy and really loved their jobs. And so I figured I should go to the one where people were really happy, love their jobs, and feel fulfilled. So that's where I went, and it was right. I mean, I think it's the best legal job in America. I think being a prosecutor is just it's the most interesting, it's the most rewarding, it's just a really great job to have. So that's why I did that. In terms of watching the TV shows, I always loved them. Even before I went to law school, I loved Law and Order, and it got a little formulaic, whatever. But I think they're fun to watch. The stuff that's on SVU is so incredibly far removed from what actually happens in the day-to-day life. A little bit, because I see it and I think, are people thinking this really happens? Or
doesn't that make real life kind of worse because it's closer to the truth and it's closer to what actually, like what the line is thinner between what the normal thing is and what you're dealing with?
It's almost, they're such completely different worlds. It's fun to compare them to each other, I think. I do get riled up when I see things that are inaccurate, which has made the blogging fun because and with the blogging, mostly what I'm trying to do is keep it short, because I could just go on and on all night. I can do a paragraph every minute or so, but I tried to pick one or two things that seem to stand out. So yeah, that's fun. And sometimes they do some things that are, even if it's completely unrealistic, they're shining a light on a problem that might be an important problem to shine a light on. Like one of the first SVUs I blogged about talked about the backlog of rape kits. So there's, if a woman or man is sexually assaulted, there's a very good chance that forensic evidence is left behind: hairs, fibers, DNA, semen, all of that things. And there's there's an exam called the sexual assault nurse exam, where the victim goes in and there's this whole procedure. The paper is spread on the floor, and she steps in there and she takes off her clothes on the paper so that any hair fibers that are on her are going to get collected in that paper. They wrap up that paper around all the clothes and take that away. And she lays down and they swab all the various parts of her to get any DNA or semen or whatever that might be inside of her. And then they pluck hairs from her head and from her private areas and all these things to compare and sample, and things are combed through and everything. And all of that is taken and put in a box, all of those swabs and clothes and samples and everything. And there is precious materials in there, because that is the difference between finding out whether a rape occurred or who did it and not. So there are these little boxes this big. After the clothes are gone, they're this big, that contains the swabbings and the combings and the cuttings and all that stuff. And there's this backlog, this scandalous backlog in America. 400,000 of those are just sitting in warehouses in cities across the country, just not getting tested, and have been for years and years. And DNA doesn't just last forever. It can last for a little bit. In a person, it only lasts 72 hours. So it's really important, if somebody's been sexually assaulted, to get the rape kit done as soon as possible. But even once that swab is taken, it's not going to last forever. It's going to degrade. And so it's really important that these get tested. And there's this whole database called CODIS, Combined DNA Indexing System, where you take all of the DNA results and you put it in there, and then if somebody else is assaulted, you can run that, or if you have a person who comes in, you run it. It's just this big database, and you can match up crimes to criminals and crime scenes to bad guys, whatever. But if they're not processed, they're not going to go in CODIS, and you're not going to get all of this incredibly valuable information. So SVU ran an episode about that, and the episode was completely unrealistic. It had this plot that was just off the charts, untrue. It was about this serial rapist who liked to rape women, strangers, over and over again. So this Jennifer Love Hewitt played this woman who he kept coming back every year or so, and he'd rape her, and she's terrorized, and oh my God, and that I've never heard of that happening. In the history of America, I think that's never happened. It's just completely false. But it was also about the rape kit backlog and this scandalous issue that really needs to be addressed. And so, even though it was like so unrealistic and just a crazy plot, the point that they had to make about this real life scandal I thought was very important, and the internet started buzzing about it, people started talking about it, and so they did do a good job of kind of shining a light on this issue. So I think, when they do that periodically. So I appreciate it when they do that. I think it's neat. Yes, ma'am.
They have librarians in your office?
Yes.
How do you use them, and what do they do?
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. Our librarian, it was Jay Ferris. Do you guys know him? Jay Ferris. And he was wonderful. I think actually he's not there now. He may have just gone away, but he was great, and I used him a lot when I was in the appellate section, and we were dealing with when cases are on appeal, it's always about a legal issue. So instead of being in the trenches trying the cases, you're just researching and coming up with law and precedents and what's happened before. And when that was going on, you're always looking at like legislative history, like what did the lawmakers say when they were passing the bills, and can you find this obscure case about the Magna Carta, because and then I was going to Jay all the time. When I'm in the trial sections, not so much. Much more you're dealing just like on your feet, and you're thinking, God, I think I read a case like 5 years ago. Your Honor, I think there's a case that says, and then you might run back and pull it up on Westlaw, but you're dealing with the law on a much different level, a much more superficial level. You're dealing with the facts, really, much more. That's your kind of day-to-day bread and butter. When you're doing the appellate stuff, that's when you're dealing with the law more and the history and the precedents, and that's when the law librarian becomes very important.
You were writing the book.
Yes.
As a writer, do you use the service of any librarian?
Oh, interesting. Let me think. I don't think I did.
No?
I don't think I did.
You have a good reference collection at home?
No, but you know what? I was writing about what I knew. I was writing about what I was doing on a daily basis. So that made it a lot easier. I mean, I could very easily describe what this young prosecutor might go through because, I'd be writing about it at 5 a.m. and then at 9 a.m. I'd be doing it. So, that was very, very helpful in that way. Yes, sir.
I work for the D.C. Public Library.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to have to look and see if we have your book.
Thank you.
I'm going to get it on the display.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Detective.
Thank you.
Right after I read it. But I have two questions. First of all, the library, D.C. Public Library, has hundreds of copies of Stieg Larsson's.
Ah, yes. Dragon Tattoo. Right.
And the girl who kicked the hornet's nest, and Stieg Larsson envisioned, I think, 10.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
And he wrote 3, and then died of a heart attack.
Right.
But we circulate so many that I had to find out what it was all about. I got a copy, and I couldn't put it down about 3/4 of the way through, and it's just a fascinating read. And so I was wondering, first of all, if you have an opinion, if you read these, and do you see any parallels between Larsson and yourself? And there's a series of horrendous crimes against women in Sweden. And then my other question deals with Truman Capote's In Cold Blood.
Yeah.
I run the book club at the West End branch of the D.C. Public Library.
Oh, great.
One of the cool things about that is that I get to pick books that I've always wanted to read. And so just this month, we read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood.
Isn't that wonderful?
And it's another fascinating read about these apparently senseless murders that take place out in this deserted, rural area of Kansas by these two petty criminals, Richard Hickok and Perry was the other one. But what Capote does
so amazingly, is to build. Perry Smith is the other, but he builds empathy for these guys. These are the criminals that have committed this cold-blooded murder of this family of 4, and their descriptions of the blood and the hair that are sprayed all over the wall. And when I read that novel, I didn't want to feel sorry. I didn't want to feel empathy for Perry Smith, but he's humanized in that book by Truman Capote, and I wondered, are you consciously building empathy for certain characters of yours? And then finally, in Cold Blood, the point is made at the end when these 2 guys are hung. It's capital punishment in the state of Kansas. So they suggested that what the state of Kansas is doing to the 2 convicted murderers is what the 2 convicted murderers did to their victims in this household.
Right.
So does capital punishment defer horrendous crime?
Oh, well.
So I'm giving.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that question. Yeah, so I love that book. That is an amazing book, in Cold Blood. And have you seen the movie, too?
I haven't seen the movie.
Totally worth a rent. Yeah, I think it's called Capote. And Philip Seymour Hoffman, I think that's the guy. Really good, really good. Yes, I do try to have empathy for everybody in the book. And that's, as a prosecutor, you don't need to have as much empathy for the defendant. You try to understand him and where he's coming from to figure out how the crime occurred. And sometimes you can't help but have empathy for the defendant because very often he has had a very rough life too. There's a reason why people end up doing some of the terrible things they end up doing. It's, a lot of times not people who grew up in nice, friendly households with supportive parents and, a solid family. So you hear what happened and you feel like, oh goodness, this is terrible. And I feel terrible for this guy. But a lot of times, I don't talk to the defendant. I'm not allowed to. I'm legally barred from it. I don't have conversations with him. I don't get to know him. The only thing I know about him is the very worst thing that he has done that I'm trying to convict him for. So I don't have a ton of empathy. There's some, and don't get me wrong, I'm not just like looking at him like a cold lump of Play-Doh or something, but our job is not it's not necessary in the job to feel this, sympathy and love for the defendant as the prosecutor. But as a novelist, you must love all of your characters, I think, even the really bad ones. And because you're creating them, you're kind of their parent in a way. And also, you know them inside and out, and they're all people, and everybody has a good and a bad side, and everybody has, has terrible parts and nice parts, and I think everybody just has them kind of different proportions or whatever, and it's just kind of understanding that. So, I think it's much easier in fiction, maybe, because you are the creator to have that empathy. Whereas what Truman Capote did with these are like really, really bad guys who, did this terrible, unspeakable. I mean, to this nice family who was just kind of living on their farm, and he did manage to make you feel this empathy for them. So, it's something to aspire to. And the Stieg Larsson books, they're good. They're really good. I've only read the first one, but he draws a lot of attention to that whole violence against women. There's all sorts of debate about whether, he's really is he really a feminist, or is this just like femsploitation sort of thing? So I can see both sides of that coin there, but he's certainly a good writer, and I read it and was thinking, wow, good craft work there. So I can see why it's doing so well. Yeah.
Do you, as a writer, ever try to sort of correct things that you wish would happen in real life? Like, do you try to take advantage of, particularly since you're writing about something that basically you're doing every day, do you ever take advantage of your book to say, if I really had my wishes, this is how it would work?
Right. I thought I might do that, but I didn't, because I actually think that it's more interesting to kind of have it happen how it actually would happen. I think what I bring to the genre and to my books is that I kind of know how it would really happen, how things would really go down. So I tried to stick with that, but I gave my characters a little more loose rein than I do. I'm a mom. I go home. There's Cheerios all over the place. Like, I'm trying to get the kids in bed, whatever. But meanwhile, like, my protagonist, she's out like bantering and flirting and having wine and like having a great time. And so good on her. But that's where more of the creativity came in terms of the legal stuff. And of course, the whole story's fiction, and ultimately. I don't want to give anything away, but I'm not going to give anything away, but it's fiction. But I tried to, along the way, infuse the story with authentic details and kind of show how it would kind of really go down in the details of the everyday life of this woman. Yeah. Yes.
How did you determine your path with publishing? I mean, where did you start? What was that journey?
How did I figure out how to get the book published? Yeah. Well, so I wrote the book. It took me about a year to write. And then after that, I looked back and determined, just on my own, that it was not ready. So then I spent another year fixing it, rewriting it, and then rewriting it again, and then rewriting it some more, until I felt like it was really, really ready to go. And I'd heard that you need to have your best product ready, as we were talking about earlier, right? That you have to have your best product ready to go. So I just really worked until I felt like it was the best that I could do. And then I went and got this book called How to Get Your Book Published for Dummies. Really. It was one of those yellow books. And it was about 300 pages. And what it boils down to is get yourself an agent. And what that boils down to is contact everybody you've ever met in the industry who knows anything about in the publishing industry, and throw yourself at their mercy, basically. So, and also you're going to send out 1,000 letters, and you're going to get back 999 rejections, and maybe you'll get one nibble. And then good luck with that nibble. No. So what you're supposed to do is, and I think the Dummies book was written right on the brink of the revolution to the internet, and I think they need a new edition, actually, because nobody sends letters anymore. Everybody sends emails. And everybody's talking about sending your letter with a self-addressed stamped envelope that they could send stuff back to you, but nobody does that. I mean, it's email. Everything is email these days. So what you're supposed to do is email these folks and say, hey, here's who I am. Here's what I've written, and would you like to see my manuscript? And this letter it's called a query letter in and of itself is like this masterpiece that you work on for 2 weeks, getting this one letter to be just perfect, because this is your knock on the door, and they're going to peer out the little hole, and if they like what they see, maybe they'll open it a crack, but if not, they're just going to close it, and that's it. That's the last you hear from them. So you want that one tiny look to be very, very good. I started thinking about anyone who I knew in the publishing industry, which wasn't very much. I know a lot of lawyers. I don't know so many writers. Didn't know any writers, really. So I just read a book, though, by a woman who graduated from Harvard Law School a couple of years after I did. And I figured that seemed like a good place to start. It was a very charming book called The Opposite of Love by Julie Buxbaum. So I shot her an email, and she was very kind, responded to me. We talked a little bit on email. We eventually talked on the phone, and she said, my agent might be interested in this. Would you like me to call her? And I was like, yes, please. And her agent was this this kind of legend in the publishing industry. She'd discovered The Kite Runner out of a slush pile, and she'd worked with Stephen King and all these famous people. And I was like, yes, please send me to your agent. So she did, and her agent asked for my manuscript. And a week later, she said, I want to represent you. I love your book, and let me be your agent. So at that point, the how-to book for dummies is okay, now first they say you're never going to get an agent, and then they're like, and when somebody gives you an offer, then you really need to consider it and weigh it against all the others. It's what are you talking about? No, you're going to be my agent. Yes. So I said yes, and I didn't have to do that whole crazy process. It was the first query that I'd made. I'd set up this whole spreadsheet and everything for rejections, and I didn't have to use it. So So then she got it. She was a very good agent and helped edit the book. She and her colleague helped edit the book down. And then when they were ready to sell it, I said, let me just check with DOJ, Department of Justice, and make sure I don't need to do anything else before this book gets sold. So I went to my ethics advisor and said, I have this book. I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but I'd like to sell this novel, and is there anything I need to be doing with you guys? Or I think my words were more like, there's nothing I need to be doing through you guys, right? And they were like, no, actually. So that's when they had to be vetted by my office and by Main Justice, and it took 4 months for them to do the vetting, which is actually, DOJ is dealing with some big things. They're dealing with Guantanamo, and they're dealing with all of the crimes happening in America. So, my little legal thriller is not going to be the banging down the door the top issue. I thought it was actually a fair amount of time for all these people to vet it. But at the time, of course, during those 4 months, I was just sweating bullets and wondering what did I care about more, my job or my book, if it came down to that. But luckily it did not come down to that, and they said it was fine. They had me change a couple things, like I described security procedure, basically how the heroine gets in and out of the courthouse and the U.S. Attorney's Office. They asked me to take that out. So I guess so that terrorists wouldn't know and how to get in and out. I don't know, but minor things they asked me to change. They were all fair and easy changes, and I made them. And then my agent went and sold it, and that's when I signed it. I love that question. There have been a couple nibbles lately, so yeah. So fingers are crossed, and there's a lot of knocking on wood and all the other lucky gestures. So.
He wants to play you in the movie.
Yeah, it's not me. Right. No, I know. I actually spent a lot of time saying that it's not me because the character has a really mean dad, and my poor dad is like the nicest guy ever, and so for poor old dad's sake, I have to tell you it's not me. But so who would play that main character? I don't know. I kind of like the woman from Juno, Ellen Page. She has this, the character's young. She's like 26, so it's not somebody like from my generation. It's somebody a little bit younger, and I think she has this kind of charming earnestness that would work. But for the love interest, for the guy who's the public defender who she's in love with, I'm thinking kind of a young John Cusack mixed with Jimmy Stewart and a little bit of James Franco to give him some edge. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So we can take one more question.
Okay, we got one more question. Eileen.
Without telling too much, there's one scene, and I'm not going to say anything, where Anna goes, she takes something out of the trash can.
Yes.
And then she does something with it and sends it off. And is that actually admissible as evidence?
Yeah.
Because the way she got it.
Yes, I think it would be. I think she put herself at risk of becoming a witness in her own case, but she was more worried about finding the truth. So she'd be a chain of custody witness would be the problem. But otherwise, yeah, totally admissible. I think.
I wanted to research it today, and so I was like, okay, I have to ask this because I was going back to this. I wonder if this is really because you can't admit.
Right.
Certain evidence and stuff. Like, I wonder because she didn't get it on the right, the right way.
Actually, now that you mention it, I think that goes to your question where I kind of had my heroine do something that I wouldn't do myself. I wouldn't, it's like kids don't do this at home. Like prosecutors don't try this at home. But I did it because it was kind of fun and it was a little bit dramatic, and so I had her do it that way. And so yes, I guess I did do it. Sort of thing. There you go.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to DCSLA Radio. For more information about DCSLA and our events, visit our website at units.sla.org/chapter/CDC.